right, guys, good evening. Today we are going to be going over one of the last videos for the E2. We're going to be going over how to use Ultrasight to back up and restore and how to update the firmware on E2. So here we go. So first things first, you're going to connect to the site. So we're already connected. So when you want to say you want to update the firmware, we'll go over that first. So what you're going to do is you're going to right click on the site, not the controller, go to update firmware. Okay, now you're going to find whatever firmware you have. So click on here, go to wherever you saved it as. I always save it in a random file. I have some I actually do not have any firmwares on this one, but okay, so say you downloaded a firmware, you go to Emerson's website. All my firmwares are on my work laptop. So you go to Emerson's website, you download the said firmware from Emerson's website. You just type in E2 Ultrasight firmware. You click on this. Okay, it'll pull up a file. If it's an E2E, it'll be in a 4 number. If it's an E2, it'll be in a 3 number. So like 309 F04, and then if it's an E2E, it'll be 409 F04. So you click open, and then it'll go through a screen prompting you to ask you if you want to update the firmware, and you're going to say hit transfer. After it's done transferring, you're going to hit apply. This takes generally 10 to 15 minutes. Make sure there's no power interruptions while you're doing this. And while you're doing this, just make sure everything's good. It's not going to cycle the power because it will brick the controller if the power cycles while you're doing a firmware update. Now, once it goes through, so say there's 5 of them in a row, so you have 5 controllers, it's going to do all 5. The one you are remoted into, so it'll have a G next to it, it'll say gateway. Once it goes to do that one last, what'll happen is it'll disconnect you from Ultrasight, and it's going to go through and do the firmware update. After it's done doing the firmware update and reboots and goes through its thing, you could then connect back to it. So that is how you do a firmware update or a downgrade. It's the same thing you do a downgrade. You would go to the right click, go to the update firmware. You'll pick your firmware, so it'll be like E2, F03, whatever it is. See if I can find it here.
Years later.
Yeah, I'm sure it's in here, but I do not know where.
Many months later.
Yeah, so I mean, you could just pick whatever firmware you wanted to do and then go backwards from there. Just be careful when you're doing downgrading because you could lose some stuff if it's not. So say you have some Dixel controllers in there that require a certain firmware to run because their revision file wasn't in there, you may lose those. So the reason to upgrade firmwares, okay, new refrigerants, issues get fixed. So say there's a ongoing issue with a firmware, there's revisions in there. Emerson releases a document every time they do a firmware of what changes and why they changed it. It may be new refrigerants, it may be added Dixel controllers, it may be added applications, it may be improvements to security, all that jazz. So that's why you do a firmware upgrade. We have had instances with like FSDs that will not communicate with an E2, and it continues to not communicate. We've had to do firmware upgrades on there, and when you do the firmware upgrade, it forces a file that tends to get deleted out of the E2 somehow back into the E2. So we've had pretty good luck with that. So Now I'm going to show you guys how to back up a E2 and or restore one. So if you right click on the site, you're going to go to backup all units. Okay. So it's backing up the controller right now. Okay. So it finished backing up. Now it saves to this file in UltraSite. So what you're going to want to do is come down here and you could hit export set point file. Okay. We'll call this test E2. Saves it as a .3 file, or you could save it as an E2 backup, E2B file. I usually save it as an E2B file. So now that file is saved on your computer. So I generally save these files in my Dropbox so that they can be sent to anybody. So if you go in here, like in my Dropbox, for example, I have it set up, via customer. So this is Aldi, for example. I have it set up by divisions. I mean, there's a lot more. My computer hasn't synced up. But like you can see, I have a ton of them on there. So all my files are saved on here. Now, a couple things you could do with that. If you save it as a E2B file backup, that's what you're going to need to stick it in a USB to shove it in an E2E to upload a file. E2Es are super nice with that USB drive backup. I mean, you could back things up in there. You could, after you make changes, after you make any changes, you should always back it up. I mean, if you leave a USB on site, that's great. Not all E2s have them, and most people don't leave that on site. I generally recommend that you back them up every time you make a change, or you do a PM. Back it up, back the controller up. You're not going to hurt it by doing anything, especially if you have an E2E. The only firmware that really doesn't work is it's 408 FO3. For some reason, the USB operation was conflicted by it, so that one does not work. Now let's go over how to restore an E2. Okay, so you connect to it. So we're already connected to this controller. You connect to it. Then you're going to go to import set point file. Okay. Then you're going to find that set point file. Say that. Okay. Let's resave it real quick because I do not know where I saved it at. All right. I had to restart UltraSite. It locked up on me. So we are going to go back into this. We're already connected. We're going to go down to the E2. Go to import. Okay. Let's resave it real quick because I do not know where I saved it at. All right. I had to restart UltraSite. It locked up on me. So we are going to go back into this. We're already connected. We're going to go down to the E2. Go to import set point file. Okay, we got our E2B file. We're going to hit open. Okay, so it already loaded the file for us. So all you have to do now is wait for it to go through everything and load. All right, it's finished loading. So now all you have to do is right click on the E2 again, hit restore. Okay, hit yes. So it's restoring all the cells back to what it would be before.